Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Special Education Legal Fund's September webinar on transition to kindergarten and elementary school. And I am actually I'm not your host this evening. My name is Christine Lyon. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of Special Education Legal Fund. And I'm very pleased to bring this panel to you this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to, have a special acknowledgement to our corporate sponsors, without whom so much of what we do is not possible. At the platinum level, I'd like to acknowledge the Eagle Hill School in Greenwich and WealthSpire Advisors. At the gold level, I'd like to acknowledge Winston Preparatory School. At the silver level, our featured sponsor of the evening, Villa Maria School, as well as Fusion Academy, Chapel Haven Schliefer Center, and American School for the Deaf. And at the bronze level, I'd like to acknowledge our friends and partners at the Pinnacle School and the Spire School in Stamford. Thank you to all of our sponsors. What you do is crucial. Your support is crucial to what we do. For those of you who are not familiar with Special Education Legal Fund, our mission is to provide resources, knowledge, and support for families in need with children in the special education system. We do this predominantly through, in a couple of ways, but predominantly through our grants program, the attorney grant program, and the advocate grant program, which I'll talk about in a minute, as well as this webinar series, which we provide free of charge to anyone who's interested on a variety of topics in special education law, advocacy, and education. Grants for families. We just kicked off our grants programs for our, seventh year, actually, in September. And applications for this month are due on September 15th, and the required interviews due on the 22nd. The attorney grant program, as I mentioned earlier, it is a program that provides families in need with up to $6,000 in legal support from a qualified special education attorney. The Advocate Grant Program provides families in need with $1,000 in advocacy support from a qualified non-attorney special education advocate. If you're interested in this program, you want to learn more about it, you want to see if you qualify, or you want to start the process, please visit our website at spedlegalfund.org and click on the button that says Apply for Grant, and that will take you to the page with all the information that you need, or you can scan this QR code. The process has three. This is a bigger version of the QR code. The programs have 4 steps, essentially, 3 for you, 1 for us. The first is the pre-screen, which happens on the website. The second is the application, which you receive via email should you, should you qualify for the programs. The third is the interview, which we schedule with you. It takes place, over the course of the month, takes about 45 minutes. And the fourth piece is the notification. We notify all families, all applicants in the month in which they apply. So if you applied in September, you will know the status of your grant by the end of September, and so on and so forth. Our next webinar, really excited to kick off this year's school showcase series with a special, a special presentation by Fusion Academy. We're really, really pleased to have educators from Fusion Academy, from Fusion Fairfield, Fusion Greenwich, Fusion Fairfield, and Fusion Westchester on our next webinar, which is Wednesday, September 25th at 12 noon. You can register for that webinar the same way you registered for this one. And I really love this series because it gives you, a really in-depth look at each one of these schools that we partner with. So, families can, on their lunch break, take a few minutes and learn something about, an educational resource in the community. So please join us on September 25th. I am so pleased to welcome Dana Jonson back to the Self webinar series. I actually, I went through and counted how many webinars you've done, but now I've forgotten. I think it's 5. Anyway, you're going to get a jacket, soon, like an honorary jacket. Anyway, Dana is one of my favorite people in, that I've met in the process of, forming and running Self. She is one of those people that, walks the walk. She's you're an educator, you're an attorney, you support families in special education, and you have 1 million kids, so all of whom, have traversed this process at some point. So, she really knows her stuff from all sides of the equation. I mean, all of us do, but, I think all of us come to this from that perspective. But yeah. So welcome back, Dana. We're thrilled to have you. Next up is Anne Munkenbeck. Anne is a special education advocate and honestly has, just really so much experience, as a special education, so much knowledge, so much experience, has been advocating for families for, just a gazillion years, like 20, and really knows not only, the ins and outs of, IEPs and 504s and, and learning disabilities, but, the ins and outs of the various districts in Connecticut. Anne's a great partner for any family, and we're thrilled to have you back on this webinar series. I think this is your fourth webinar. I'm like now guessing, but something like that. Anyway, your jacket's on the way too. So thank you so much, Anne. We are really excited to welcome Jane Faherty for her first webinar with us. Jane is an experienced special education advocate who is deeply involved in supporting families and students with specific learning challenges. She's also, has really deep and in-depth knowledge of families of our little guys, our guys that are in the, birth to 3 and, really transitioning into that pre-K kindergarten space. She also runs she's the executive director of the Jumpstart program, which is an amazing program at the Stanford JCC and the Maritime Aquarium in Norwalk. And she just tons of stuff in really partnering with various nonprofits. And we're lucky to be one of those. So we are thrilled to have Jane for her first, her first webinar. So thanks, Jane. And finally, I would be remiss without, shouting out our distinguished moderator, Virginia Blum. Virginia is, really near and dear to my heart. I met Virginia when we were, really starting, Self, and she, is an amazing advocate. She, as we were starting this process, I was like, I think I'm going to start this nonprofit. And Virginia's like, I think I'm going to be an advocate. And I was like, that's way harder. And, and she's an amazing advocate and has really continues to astound me with, her depth of experience over the, with children and families of all, different learning needs. She also comes to this process, as a parent of a child with needs. So, welcome, Virginia. This is your first, hopefully not last, stint as a moderator. Oh, and she also was, so great. You might know her if you joined us last year for our Lunch and Learn series, which covered a variety of topics that are, really important in the advocacy process, in the special education advocacy process. So welcome, Virginia. I would be remiss without this disclaimer. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. If you are in need of legal advice, support, or assistance, you should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in Connecticut or New York to discuss the specific needs of your individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or its representatives of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals on the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear on this panel. So here we are, transition to pre-K and elementary school. Virginia, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Christine. As I began to think about what good questions to ask this, great panel, I started to think about my own anxiety about having a child that was going through different transitions and stages. And certainly the transition from preschool to kindergarten is a big step for any family to navigate and for any child. And a child with special needs adds another layer to that. So I'm really excited to kind of think about the questions that you might want to ask and how to prepare, and what kind of support your child may need as you think about this process. I did want to start by mentioning that there is a new entry age to start kindergarten for the 24-25 school year. They need to be 5 by September 1st. And this brings Connecticut in alignment with most other states in the country. And it is a very positive change, but always going to have a few hiccups along the way as we navigate the new entry age. So I thought a good place to start would be to kind of turn it over to the panel about what are the differences between a preschool setting and a kindergarten setting, and how does that impact your child? Anybody want to jump in?
Some of that depends upon the school district. So some of the school districts might have mixed age groups in the pre-K versus when the child transitions into kindergarten. Typically, they are all of a similar age in terms of the year that they were born. So that might be one of the differences. Within that mixed age group, you have children that might be a couple of years apart. You might have some 3-year-olds mixing with 5-year-olds, or if children hold back at an older age. So that's one of the distinct differences. One of the other differences too is the expectation of what happens within the pre-K educational environment versus the kindergarten educational environment, and maybe the number of transitions or educators that they might be exposed to during a school day as well, in terms of specials, who completes those specials and how those specials take place, whether they take place in the child's classroom or a child has to navigate to different areas of a school building. And all of those changes can be intimidating for a child as well as a parent, not knowing all the people that are going to be interacting with their child throughout a day or even a year, if there's different providers that provide different skills throughout a 12-month period.
I'd like to add a few points in that, in my experience, if a child is in a preschool setting that is supported because the child is identified with special needs at that point and does have a plan, an IEP or a 504, that typically the preschool setting is focusing mostly on socialization and school readiness skills, like is the child able to independently toilet or is able to independently get their materials together, and softer skills, as opposed to once they enter kindergarten, things tend to ramp up relatively quickly into some more concrete academic skills. And the question is whether that your child is ready for that ramp up, or whether that would be intimidating and anxiety provoking for your child, and what supports they might need for that changeover or that transition.
Good point, Anne. Like I was thinking too about at the beginning, the curriculum measures that they put through those kindergartners, you know, whether it's early reading or some of the things that I think, you know, are testing to see whether they're picking up those skills. And that's definitely not something I think they even begin to think about in preschool. Is there any skills that you should really be thinking about prior to your child having prior to starting kindergarten? I know we mentioned the different transitions, but you know, what should you be thinking about your child having as you think about whether they're ready for kindergarten?
If your child has already had an IEP during their pre-K experiences within the school district should have been working with you and your child to prepare them and get them ready for the kindergarten experience. So during those PPT meetings that you'd have had for at least 1, if not 2 or more years, you should have already been working with the team to make this transition as seamless as possible, and to have had an introduction to maybe which school might be the most appropriate within the district for your child to enter kindergarten into. Some districts have more than one option in terms of kindergarten, and the placement of your child should be based upon the evaluations, the eligibility of your child for the IEP, and then looking at the district as a whole to find out which classroom setting might be the most appropriate for them at a kindergarten level. It may or may not be your districted home school that is the most appropriate within the district, So also be aware as a parent of the different options within your district, if that is indeed the case, and maybe the different environments. It could be accessibility. For example, some school buildings are easier to navigate. They may or may not have staircases, depending upon your child's needs. They may have playgrounds that are more accessible than others. So some of the physical geographic properties and qualities of building should also come into consideration, depending upon the needs of your child. And again, some schools within a district might be the location where they have core classrooms, or they have different areas of expertise located in a specific building, versus having specialists that travel from building to building within a district. So there are a number of different things to consider beyond just your home school, which may or may not be the best and the least restrictive environment for your child to navigate. But without conversations with the district or others already participating in the district, it's going to be hard for you to necessarily know all those nuances if there are different options available. Again, the size of a district varies tremendously throughout Fairfield and Westchester. So those are other things that would need to be taken into consideration.
But
I
if you
want to add to that.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Anne.
No, you go. I've already spoken.
No, I was just going to say that while a lot of those things are very important to keep in mind, as a parent, you're not allowed to choose your teacher. So if you do feel like this is the right room, focus on what are the aspects of that, as opposed to, I need Mrs. Smith's classroom because this person's is going to, set my child off. And I've seen those classrooms, but to focus on what is it your child needs, and is that exhibited through their through their IEP for their special education needs.
Right. And to Dana and Jane's points, it's really important that your team is robustly looking at your students' readiness skills to go on to that kindergarten environment, which is quite different in many ways. And so if you look at your student's IEP or a typical IEP, there are not only pre-academic skills, there's also the socialization, behavioral, independence in being able to manage those environments, and how your student might respond, your child might respond to those environments, to Jane's point. So there are a lot of soft skills to be looked at for those pre-kindergarten skills, and to factor in going forward, and you should leverage the time during preschool to try to build on those aspects that are going to be needed or more robustly needed in kindergarten.
The other thing too is, I think when you transition into any new school environment or with any new teaching personnel, you want them to understand who your child is. So I always recommend, by leading with photos or videos, capturing the essence of your child having success or joy or delight in something, so that not only your words can explain who your child is, but sometimes if you choose the right photo or the right mini clip of a video, nothing too long, but just to capture a moment, that can help you explain to the team that you're working with who the essence of your child is, because you want them to understand them as an individual, not them based upon a diagnosis or based upon a report that might be out of date to some extent. So I think that personal touch and really trying to create that relationship and connection with the individuals around the transition team can be also very helpful, because they might be people you're going to be communicating with for a number of years after the transition, and you really want them to understand who you are, and also maybe your family dynamic. Are there other siblings in the district, and your relationship with other practitioners as well? Just give them a holistic view as to who your child is, not just a child presented on a piece of paper, but they're a living, breathing person, and present any data or anecdotal pieces of information you have, as well as, if you're comfortable, signing releases for them to connect and communicate with outside practitioners you might have been working with as well.
I love that point. Sorry to interrupt. I think that a lot of times, those of us who are parents of kids with needs, we tend to focus on their weaknesses, their challenges, and not necessarily on their strengths, so, highlighting a clip, of happiness or success or whatever is, those are the things that very often the strengths are what is going to help your child navigate their challenges. So, I think it's great. I think that was a great point. Sorry, Dana.
I wasn't.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I just had a question because I felt like that turbocharged in, and if I'm a parent, how do I know what resources are out there? Like, who do I go to and how do I get that information so that I can be an informed participant in that meeting and ask the right questions? Like, what advice do you have to help kind of become informed before I'm sitting in a meeting and somebody's telling me where my child should or shouldn't
Well, I
be?
think for
So-
starters, this shouldn't be the very first conversation you're having with your district, right? If your child has special education needs from the age of 3, you should be talking with your school, actually even probably before that, because at 3 is when your school district they're under their purview. So you should have been talking to them for some time. There are ways to connect with other parents in your town, depending on the town that you're in. And I'll probably let Jane and Anne speak to that, but if they'd like, but I think the most important thing is this shouldn't be the very first time that your school district is learning about your child if they have special education needs. This is something that should have been going on for some time. If for some reason it is, you're just realizing it, or, you're unsure, you're probably getting evaluations, and that's often the best way to find out what it is your child needs, is to start with those evaluations and make sure that you're not just guessing on what your child needs. Now, you know your child best, so usually parents have a sense of what kind of environments they function best in. But I think the conversation needs to start early.
There's organizations, we run one called Jumpstars, which is a collaboration between Jumpstart and Start Inc., which is based in Norwalk. And the idea is we bring parents together. Typically it is more the mothers or the females, the aunts, or the caretakers. And within those organizations, it's a great time to meet parents at different ages and stages. And through their experiences, some of them have taken a few steps ahead of you at that time. They can really help make you aware, as Dana said, about different options that could be available. Unfortunately, we don't know what we don't know, and sometimes we find out after the fact. So broaden your conversation if you're comfortable doing that. I know that culturally some people prefer to keep some information to themselves. And also don't necessarily assume that your experience is going to be the same as the person you're talking to. Your child is unique, as is theirs. And so your child might need something much more bespoke or specific compared to somebody else's child. So while doing your exploration, try not to compare and contrast your child with other people's, because you don't want the district to do that either. You want the district to consider your unique situation, your unique child, and what they need. So also bear that in mind. But the best way to find out is through go on websites such as this one, go on websites that have proven to be accurate with their information. Try not to go down the wormholes of Googling things, because you might end up Googling down the wrong tunnel, which might cause you more anxiety unnecessarily. There's organizations like CPAC that you can contact. You can Google onto the Connecticut government educational websites. You can Google on this website, talk to attorneys such as Dana or advocates. Just ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions or share information about concerns that you have. And also don't be afraid to share the successes that your child has had and the inchstones, the milestones that they've reached already. Don't feel that by sharing, you're going to be preventing your child from having access to a resource either, because even though they might have done well at acquiring some skills, they might not be able to generalize those skills then in the next school setting, in which case they've not truly mastered them.
I just want to share a little bit about my own journey, because I think many parents are finding that they're gonna have their own journey and how to navigate that journey. But when I first learned about my children's disabilities, I had no idea what to do or how to think about it. I didn't have any information about how what kind of support services they should be that should be available to them when they were in the school setting. And so I just asked anybody around who would listen very detailed questions. Show me how this works. Where do I go? Who do I talk to? I got involved with our school SEPTA for many years, which was really, really helpful because I knew the dynamic of our district's environment. But
Yeah,
the
can you explain what
hierarchy was-
SEPTA is so that some
Yeah,
people-
SEPTA is a special education parent. It's like a PTA, but it's for special education. Some districts have them, some don't. We had a relatively robust one, so that allowed me an into the district and the machinations of our district and what the hierarchy was for decision making, which really, really helped. But the other thing I did was similar to this webinar. Anything that was available out in the community by a reputable organization, I would attend and learn about and broaden my understanding of not just specific needs for my children, but in general, how those pieces fit together for different kinds of support services for children, to give me kind of a broader idea. And all of those attendance at different webinars helped in the end in some way, helped me think about it, helped me argue if I needed to with the district about what was or wasn't appropriate. But to Jane and Dana's point, you as parents are the expert for your child. And so it's really important to remember that and to make sure that you are imparting on the district how you feel about your child, whether they are being successful or not, where their challenges are, including what happens at home and in the community, and not just siloing that process in the school, because as Jane said, your students should be able to generalize skills they're learning. So any information you have that you can bring to the table is really, really important to the process.
And do you guys, as a follow-up to that, if you're having difficulty connecting with your district, what do you guys recommend? Like, so getting that information, finding out, like, you know, I know Jane, you mentioned, you know, sometimes the homeschool might not be the right school. Like, what if you don't know what you don't know? Like, how would you navigate that, or what would you recommend in those situations?
One thing I'll say, and I think it was touched on, which is if you're really overwhelmed, and finding an advocate or an attorney, because they are a wealth of knowledge, an evaluator who evaluated your child. You know, what service provider do you go to? It's not that huge of a world. And so a lot of us know each other. A lot of us refer to each other all the time. And I really don't know of any advocates or attorneys who aren't going to at least, you know, even if they don't have time to talk to you, they'll send you an email saying, you know, I'm sorry, it's the busiest time of year, but here are some names of people to call to get started. So I do think to remember that a lot of us we do this is all we do. So we do have a lot of good resources to share. I also know that there's a lot of online groups that can be good in your district or even locally. I think they can be great supports for parents, but I also always caution that, you know, when you're online, you don't necessarily know who you're talking to. And, you know, as Jane said, your case may sound exactly the same as somebody else's, but it may not be. And neither you nor that person may know how. So don't really, it's not apples to apples, but I think it's a place to start if you're not connecting with your district, or you're not really, you feel like you're missing something. You know, a lot of groups, local town groups, can be helpful too.
Little PSA on the online groups. You also have to, you know, to be careful because you don't know who's on those groups. You know, there's
Right.
you know, there's
Right.
there's a very large group in Connecticut, which, you know, has many Connecticut, you know, parents of kids with special needs, has professionals, but it also has school officials, you know, and
Yep.
you know, so that's something that, you know, just bears, you know, keeping in mind as one,
Right.
you know,
You wouldn't shout it out
right.
anywhere else. Maybe
Right.
don't announce it
Maybe
online.
don't do it on the, you know,
General internet safety.
Some good
But if you're looking for specific information, try to figure out within your district who that go-to person is, to try to get information either of what's available in your district or your specific child's needs going forward. Each child has a case manager. Typically it's a special education teacher or a social worker. So that case manager is the responsible party per se for that child's program, making sure everything's running smoothly, making sure the documents are shared, et cetera. So there are different hierarchies in different districts. So going to that case manager and finding out what that is, I think is a benefit to most parents.
There's also a number of, we're lucky where we are in Fairfield that we have proximity to a number of fantastic therapeutic providers and practitioners and groups of practitioners that practice PT, OT, speech and behavior supports. And they are also often a good insight because they do attend and participate in PPT meetings, sharing their reports and their findings, and they are also sometimes worth of information. They won't necessarily give you their opinion, but they can give you some examples of where they've had great collaboration or conversations with different districts and different practitioners within districts as well. So you can also use providers outside practitioners as somebody to talk to and get information from, or they can refer you on to others that might have additional resources. But we are well positioned to have some really talented people not too far from us geographically either as well, and some incredible organizations that that are really connected within the community from a therapeutic perspective.
And just to follow up on that case manager question, if your child is transitioning from pre-K to K, would there be a different case manager, or is that case manager the same?
It depends completely on the school. In my experience, it's a different case manager, even grade to grade, which I don't think is necessarily the best model, because each year your child will have a new team and they need to get to know each other. But it really does depend on the district.
And just thinking about and sort of shifting to that transition PPT, nuts and bolts, does the school team have to have a transition meeting? Who initiates the process? Is that a parent's job? And then, as a parent, what should you do to kind of prepare for that meeting in advance of that meeting?
Well, I think it depends on whether you've been talking to your school district or not, right? So if you have not made yourself known to your school district, or you've not enrolled your child in the public school because you're in private preschool or something along those lines, then go do that immediately if you're going to send them to public kindergarten. And then it depends, because if you have an IEP with your school district, there are certain times when they would be obligated to hold a PPT, which is what we call it in Connecticut here, to discuss special education and your IEP. So there will be some obligation. Not all districts hold an IEP meeting every spring for every child going to school the next year. So if they've already at your IEP meeting in January discussed what next year is going to look like, they may not ask for that meeting. But if you're not sure, or you don't remember, or all the teachers have turned over and you want to make sure you're doing the right thing, just ask for a PPT, because parents can ask for one anytime they need. And if you want to discuss your child's program, not everything has to be discussed in a PPT, but if you're talking about programming for the following year, ask for a PPT to discuss it.
And I would definitely recommend doing that, just because if your last PPT or your annual PPT happened in January, it's a long time until June, and there are a lot of changes that could have happened during that time. So
typically, I've always requested a transitional PPT, and then if there's multiple options within a district, and even the district are unsure as to which might be the best environment, sometimes the districts allow you to go and tour those different schools within the district, and that's a really good opportunity for you to give them information and feedback. Because they might say, if it's a new child to the district, maybe you're just moving in geographically, you're relocating, then to go and take a look at the different options available can also help guide the district as to which might be the most suitable environment for your student based upon the resources that they can provide you with at any one time. But also, you want to be part of the process. You want to be part of the decision making at the PPT to help build the IEP and make sure it really does meet your child where they're at when they do transition. So you can initiate and request the transitional PPT and you would want and wish the new team members to come in and have that cross-reference and pollination of information. And also, when I've done transitional PPTs, if you have the luxury, you can invite the new team members to come and spend time and observe a session or interact with your child in the existing setting where they can see they're comfortable, they're familiar with the team, so that they can use that information when, you know, when they're joining the team on day one, so that they're not hitting the ground cold. They already have laid hands on your child, or connected or worked with your child, or observed your child working with the previous team. So the sooner you can start these dialogues and be familiar as to who the new team members are going to be, although we know things change, people leave the district, they move on to different assignments, so they're not assigned at that time of the year, the more opportunities for people to get to know your child in person through observation and anecdotal opportunities, the better and the easier for everybody to share information on a team.
That's a really good point, Jane, in terms of, you know, going and touring the school that your child might be transitioning to, because there might be, you know, something that you notice that you could bring to that PPT meeting, or ask a question. I'm concerned my child can't leave my car and get to the kindergarten classroom. How does that work? Or if they're taking a bus, how do they get from the bus to the kid? Like, these are questions that as you're touring and seeing the environment, you may think of. So I think definitely knowing that you should, as a parent, ask for that opportunity prior to your transition PPT meeting would be really helpful.
I just wanted to add one more point, and just to piggyback on some of Jane's comments, it's also a really good opportunity, if you have a transition PPT, for the new team to be introduced by the staff members that have been working with the child. So typically the transition, the incoming, or the new team would be listening very carefully to the recommendations and progress, and there should be a dialogue about how that will transfer over into their new setting, those needs that child has.
And that can happen even if your child's in a private preschool. So
Right.
you can always have, you can always request that the teacher speak to their current teacher, or sign consent so that the team can speak to the previous team, or private providers, whatever's going to create more consistency for your child in their program.
And on that point, don't forget you can request consultation hours too. So you can request a bank of consultation hours. I pretty much front load mine, because you can always request more to be added later in the year. So you know at the beginning of the year, you might need more consultation between the different practitioners within a district, but also you might want them to consult with outside practitioners too, to really get up to speed with where your child is at. Because children, particularly younger children, really change developmentally over a short period of time, potentially, especially over the summer months. If they've had ESY, or if they haven't had ESY, if they've had different experiences, if they've been on an intensive program over the summer months. So really consider consultation hours as an important part of your IEP at any time in the year, but particularly at the beginning of the school year, so you can have that those conversations taking place, and that sharing of information, not only to yourself as parent coaching and teaching, but also between the practitioners as well, because quite often there has to be and should be a correlation between PT and speech, OT and speech, and so on. So you really want that team to integrate, not to be siloed into their disciplines, but you want them to see your child holistically, and that in order to access their language, maybe they need certain postural positions to strengthen their core. So really, consultation between the team is also something to be mindful of requesting as well.
That's a great point. And then, you know, once you've had that transition PPT and you're getting ready to start into the new setting, how can the parent be sure that the supports that are in the IEP are going to be implemented in the new setting, and who's responsible to inform the new staff that is working with your child now about the IEP, and how do you know that that's happened?
I think that's all stuff you discuss at the PPT. So, you know, you can ask for, if you really need daily communication, so a lot of children do not require daily communication, but some do, you know, figuring out, how am I going to communicate with the classroom teacher? Is it going to be a log that goes back and forth? Is it going to be an email every day? Is it going to be a Word document that we all share? How are we going to communicate back and forth what's going on? And I've seen parents do that with some of the service providers as well. So if they have speech once a week, the speech and language person might reach out and say, this is what we worked on, and, you know, this is what you can do at home, or just, they had a great session, whatever it was. So there's a lot of communication that can happen, but it needs to be planned out. And if you don't have any idea who's going to be providing speech and language when you leave your IEP meeting, that's a problem. Like, I think, if you have them over the summer, though, that this is a caveat. If you have your PPT over the summer, the staff who will be working with your child might not be working over the summer, and they can't make them come in for the PPT. So if that's the case and you have a PPT with people who are not working with your child, you may want to ask for one in October or September, or early on, get the names from somebody, the case manager, so that you can communicate with the people working with your child, because that can happen. But I think there are a lot of different ways to communicate. Also, a lot of service providers maintain logs of how often they see students and when. So if you ever have a question, like you don't think something's being provided, you can also ask for them to produce the logs, which you don't always get, but you can always ask for them.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to get those logs, but
Yeah.
if you let your team know ahead of time that you'd like to see them, so you can
Mhm.
see what specific things are being worked on kind of on a weekly basis, that can also help your home program. If you want to work on those skills at home, just to keep that consistency. But I also recommend team meetings, which are, you don't necessarily have to have a formal PPT with all of the relevant parties that have to be there by the guidance, but there are lots of opportunities for team meetings, either the entire team or just one-on-one with the teacher, checking in occasionally. It's well within your purview to ask for those things. But I think that it's important to keep that communication open. And also I think it's important to watch any changes or behavioral challenges your child might have that didn't have before. So if there are any changes at home that you're noting that might be concerning to you, those are things I would share with the school, and to try to figure out how your student can be supported in that school environment, so there aren't necessarily those things happening when they come home, because quite often a ramped up school environment or those changes can affect your child's ability just to process it and just to be normal during the day. And we all know that our kids are, when they get home, that's when they begin to let go. So I always encourage parents to keep a log and to watch for any of those changes.
Really important. That's such an important point, Anne.
Yeah. The other thing you were saying is, how do we know if they're really implementing the IEP? We go into this with good faith that the practitioners are there in person and producing the results. But the other thing to do too is when your child comes home with examples of things that they've done in class, make a note of putting a date as to when they did that. And then you can build up your own portfolio of information and data that you can then use. So if the school district say to you, oh, they can now count from 1 to 20, you can go back and look at different pieces of paper to validate or not their claim in terms of mastery or satisfactory progress towards mastery. And don't be afraid to ask the question, to what extent did my child do this with independence? How much prompting did they require with this? Was this done with hand over hand assistance, or was this done with hand under hand assistance? Because you really want, the objective is for your child to be able to do it with as much independence as possible. And so you really want to understand the level of prompting that's being provided to the student as well. And one way to do that is to track your own data. And occasionally, ask them to do some of these activities that you've seen that they've had fun with, they've enjoyed at school. Can they play that game with you? Can they manage to wait patiently and take turns with you? Can they build that imaginary block tower, stack it 10? So you're not testing your child, but you can play and interact and have fun with them, and just see if what the school are purporting is actually what you're also seeing in their home situation as well.
Well, that's a
And
good point.
you could
because,
have,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say quickly, to your point, Jane, about that independent level of ability to for mastery of a skill, that should be in the IEP, dictated as whether this is with support or with prompting, or whether this is a skill that this child is able to do independently and how many times. But I always try to let's recreate that and see if my child really can do that or not. Those are important points.
the other thing I was going to say was, if the school district is seeing that your child is doing really, really well at a skill and you're not seeing that, you know, your child needs to generalize those skills. So being able to do them, it doesn't mean that they're not doing them in school, but that's really important information for your team to have, because if they are doing something perfectly in the classroom and nowhere else, you know, the school team doesn't go home with your child. So that would be very good information for them to have, that, you know, look, my child is not generalizing that skill. You know, you might have even seen it there, but there could be other cues and supports in the classroom or you know, service provider room that's assisting them in some way. So it's really important information if you are not seeing the same thing.
I did want to jump in because we had a question from the participants, and it was a kind of a good point. What do you do to prevent teachers from disliking your special education child due to proactive advocacy? So I think the concern is, by asking all these questions, are we setting up our child to have sort of a difficult relationship with their teacher?
The key is to maintain professionalism and to treat each other with respect. That's the key, and kindness. They have very challenging jobs, special education teachers and administrators. They're not perfect. They're human. We're human. I think that
general education teachers too.
All those providers, they're underpaid, they're overworked. And what, in my experience, quite often they'll find the beauty in your child to really quickly, and they'll embrace that. So that's been my experience. There are, you know, there is always that concern, but I feel like if you are approaching everything with respect and professionalism and remembering that they are working really hard, that goes a long way in developing a positive relationship.
That being said, I do just need to say,
Always.
I do get a lot of calls from people who've spent so much time trying to develop their relationship with their team that they haven't sought outside help for things that are not happening. So don't let that happen either. I think the best thing that parents can do is go to the data, go straight to the data. You know, they either are, or they are not expressing a skill. If there's a disagreement on what the child's, you know, able to produce, then get an evaluation. If you can go back to the data and say, this is what is or is not happening, it's just factual information. You're not saying you didn't do it. You know, my child doesn't know how to read is different than you didn't teach my child to read. So, you know, trying to just sort of focus on what's factually accurate and the skills that your child needs to have can sort of help, you know, not go down that rabbit hole if possible.
Well, I think one of the most important things is with communication is to have timely communication. If you have something that's niggling, something you're concerned about, don't allow it to become too large that you then have to tackle formally. Be comfortable when having those little anecdotal conversations, if possible, with a teacher at pick up or drop off. If your child is on a bus, you know, let the teacher know, oh, thank you for sharing the book that you read today. You know, I've really enjoyed singing that song with my child. Like, reach out and have that communication in a timely way. Don't allow something to fester, and don't be afraid or intimidated to ask questions or share information, because to help the teachers and the team, they need your feedback in order to know if they are having success with their child, and they want to feel good about themselves at the end of the day too, and feel good that they've helped support your child in the various ways that they're seeking to. So have honest, open, and timely communication. And if you have any doubts, don't sit on them, allow them to manifest much larger than they might necessarily be. Have that conversation at an early stage, and then follow up some of your conversations in writing. Firstly, that will help you keep a track. You've probably got so many things you're trying to remember and juggle simultaneously. Just by following up a note saying, hi, it was great to talk to you today. Thanks for sharing that Sammy did this or did that. Just let you know they're now doing X and Y. So have that communication, keep it light and straightforward, and also timely, because it's very hard for teachers to remember something that happened 3 or 4 weeks ago versus something that happened the day before or within that given week.
So I had another question, and it sort of dovetails with that, thinking about where is the right program for my child to transition to. Twofold, like, what happens if I disagree, or how do I disagree with the school team's recommendation for placement? So, it can be that I want my child to go to the neighborhood school, and the school team thinks it's another in-district program, or you want to possibly consider a magnet school, and the school team is saying no to that.
Well,
There's so many answers, but I'll.
yeah. Well,
I
the
know.
important thing is to remember that the district has to try the least restrictive environment. And so in other words, the environment where they are with typical peers, as opposed to being, in a classroom by themselves, or in a classroom with only 2 other students and providers. So it's important to try to think of it globally, from the sense of, if my child needs X supports, is that possible within the regular education classroom? Can we bring those aides, or can we bring that reading specialist into that regular education classroom? And what does that look like?
And it's
And
also
then-
important to remember that it's the least restrictive environment that's appropriate.
Right.
So it has to be appropriate for the child. Just because it's their local school and their local classroom just because it is the least restrictive environment doesn't mean it's appropriate. So yes, they could, and school districts have to do a lot to bring in services and supports in the classroom to try and make it work. That is the goal. And that comes from a place of, we used to segregate all kids with disabilities. So that it's a good goal and it's there for a reason. But if that's not what's right for your child, then, you need to address.
And just to follow up, can special ed kids be supported in a magnet school?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, they can.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think the reality that I see, some schools are better than other schools at supporting children, period, the end, right? That's just, some are and some aren't. And, if you have a school that is not known for being supportive, that doesn't mean you don't have rights. It doesn't mean that you can't send your child there and expect that they support your child. You might be in for a harder battle, and you should be aware of that and be prepared for it. But some schools are just better than others. Some magnet schools are fabulous, some aren't. That's the same with public schools. I think it just depends on where it is. And then sometimes sometimes it can depend on the personalities too, right? And that's not something that's specific to a magnet school or not a magnet school. But yes, you do have your rights if you go to a magnet school. So don't forget that. Don't let anyone tell you you don't. But maybe look into it and see if it really would be the right thing for your child.
Tour, right?
What?
I said, go tour, go look at it.
Yeah, tour,
Tour,
exactly,
right.
exactly. Go look at it, go talk to people, yep.
And to that point, if the team is recommending that your child go to a different program because they feel they can't support your child in that in the regular education classroom with additional supports, wants to move them into maybe not your home school, is that program the appropriate program for your child? What's the cohort of students there?
Mm-hmm.
What other supports are available there? And how much of a hardship will it be for your family to bus your student there? All of those things have to be factored in. So touring is really important, and keep detailed notes and ask a lot of questions.
Yes, because like your teachers, you may not in 3 months remember what happened yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So keep your notebooks close by.
And when you tour, ask to speak to the different practitioners in the building as well, if they have availability. They might not let you observe a session, but try if you can to have access. What does the OT room look like? What does the PT room look like? What do the actual facilities look like? And also, if you get to just keep your eyes and ears open as to how you hear staff members interacting with students as you walk through that building and that space. Your intuition is going to guide you a lot in terms of what you feel. And sometimes you can't put a finger on why you feel something, but don't dismiss that feeling, explore it and find out why something resonated with you and why it didn't.
I say that all the time to parents, go with your gut. If your gut tells you something's wrong, there's a good chance it is. You might not have your eye on the right ball, but there's probably something going on that if it doesn't sit right with you, it doesn't sit right with you.
Because you know your child better than
Exactly. You know your child the
you're your
best.
child. You are the expert on your child.
You'd
Mhm.
also
That's why
get
you have to be at the PPT meeting. That's why you're essential to the process.
You'll also
Exactly.
see how children responding within that environment. And the children, when you're touring, you'll see the energy that they're emanating, and that will give you a lot of feedback about a school environment and those adults working with the children too.
So I know we're almost out of time, and I just had one last parting question to think about. We've spent a lot of time talking about, planning and the meetings and the transition. So I sort of wanted to just pose it. We've done all that. What do I need to do to prepare my child to get on that bus to go to kindergarten, or to get on, to leave my car and go to kindergarten? Is there any words of advice you can give to parents out there to help with that conversation?
Yeah, I would have been taking my child as much as possible. If there's a playground at the school that's accessible and open at the weekends or after school, try and take them there. So at least that area of the building is familiar to them, so that they can see where they might have to ambulate and navigate outside of the building. If some school buildings are open during different times of the weekends, maybe for basketball tournaments or recreational activities, if there's an opportunity, you just, oh, hey, let's just pop in here and just use it as a chance to help the child become familiar. Use social stories. Ask the school to provide you with a social story ahead of time as well, with as much lead time as possible. You don't want to overwhelm your child with, oh, we're starting this new school too far ahead, because they might not understand it. But you don't need to talk about the social story being their school. It can just be a story about a school. And then as you get closer to the time, you can start using the language, oh, this might be, talk about it being their teacher. But when you first present it, it could just be a nice story about a school and teachers and children in a school. And then you transition them into it being their story that they would then have at a later date. And play dates, try and arrange play dates in that playground with family or friends or children that they might be familiar with within that community setting as well.
I quite often will ask for a tour of the school and meet the teacher and get to know the classroom and all the relevant areas within that school before the crowds come. So most schools will have an orientation day, but what I'll ask is that there is that option for the child before everybody else goes through that orientation. So it's just very calm and they can move through that space the way they might be comfortable doing that and get that guidance from each of the providers. That seems to help quite a bit.
And if you're having your IEP meeting in May, then that's a good time to plan that and say, I want it in his IEP that we're going to have, we're going to do however many tours. Sometimes I've had students go the year before. So say while school's station, they may go visit, or, for at least a short period of time, if it's feasible. That's not always feasible. Depending on the student and depending on how well they transition to new environments and to new people, that is stuff that you can also plan in the IEP so that you have a plan when August comes.
And it might be that your child is not necessarily available for a full day at the beginning, and might need to start on slower incremental steps until they can actually transition to what would be more typical.
You can also, at the transition meeting too, when they're doing the evaluations, get the team. If your child isn't already in district, if your child is in a private preschool setting, when they're doing the evaluation process, get that transition team to see your child in their existing school environment. So we do it with Jumpstart all the time. The school evaluation teams come into our Jumpstart classroom to conduct the evaluations, because it's an educational environment that the child is already familiar with. They're already used to the classroom routine and the people within that environment. So it's a really good snapshot and representation as to how that child might then use those skills in the next educational setting. So don't be afraid to invite the team to come and observe your child within their existing educational setting too.
Wonderful.
These were great. Thank you so much for everybody. I took away a lot of good points. And so I hope our people that participated and listened did as well. But thank you for your time. And Christine, if you have any parting thoughts.
Yeah, thank you to our distinguished panelists for joining us this evening to share their knowledge and expertise and experience about this process, which, is obviously a difficult one for, I mean, any transition is, can be a challenging one. Our next webinar, as I mentioned, is September 25th, featuring Fusion Academy, and we look forward to seeing everybody there. Have a good night and be well.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.